Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every other week to discuss a few of the places where we currently see grace and its absence playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. We're glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. God.
Well, September feels like it is in full swing, and I'm so happy to be talking to the two of you today, even if there's a slight somberness to our opening vibe. We are going to dedicate this episode to our dear friend Everett Lees, who is the rector of Christ Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Everett was a huge supporter of Mockingbird and a fan, and told everyone that would listen about our work, and he was at our conferences, and he brought Mockingbird to Tulsa. And Everett was diagnosed in late August with pancreatic cancer.
Just a few weeks ago.
Died, I think, 15 days later. So he leaves behind 3 children and a wife and a very huge crater in a church. What I'm told is the church had 40 people on Sundays when he got there and 400 when he died.
Wow.
And that's not a common story in our denomination, in the Episcopal Church, certainly. But more than that, Everett was kind of one of these folks who had he had opinions and he had passion, and he was a voice on social media that didn't seem that toxic, and it was always interesting and combined some humor and just kind of everything I always hoped or thought that someone in that vocation, an Episcopal priest, could actually be in the modern world. He was not trying to prop up a brand. He was really interested in loving people for the sake of the world and to converting them. Like he thought something was at stake in the gospel, but he was just breathed grace from start to finish. So that's our dedication this episode. Sarah, I believe our friend Kara Slade, can you read what she wrote?
Yeah, she wrote something beautiful. Father Everett Lees was a dear friend, a gracious host, and a jovial theological comrade. More importantly, he knew and proclaimed the free grace of God in Christ. I'll never forget how he left beef jerky, Reese's, and a regular Coke in my room at Oklahoma's clergy conference. It was my, quote, celebrity rider demand. He was a faithful priest, a loving husband and father, and a true son of Oklahoma. My love and prayers go out to his wife and children and the people of Christ Church, Tulsa. So sweet.
Sweet. Really, really heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Really heartbreaking. But what a wonderful guy to have known. RJ, did you have any contact with Everett? I believe you did.
I did. Yeah, I mean, I think we just met for the first time face-to-face at the recent Mockingbird conference, but then he and I emailed every so often, and I actually called him because he had, was moving his church onto this software platform and wanted to see how that was going. And so he and I had chatted a few times about that, and then he shot me some things about the podcast. I preached about him this past Sunday.
Really?
Because, I said in my sermon, I have spent a lot of time with dying people and families. So I think I've done something like 200 funerals if I add them all up. But his death, for some reason, it hit me, I think, harder than most. And I think one just, kind of selfishly, I see myself in him. We're the same age. We have 3 kids, and I had seen the Facebook posts where he was in the hospital, and, I think he had 2 posts I saw. One was just saying what a saint his wife was for taking such good care of him, and one thanking everyone for their prayers. But honestly, I thought he had like appendicitis or like a broken bone or something.
Yeah.
And so I didn't reach out because I'm like, oh, he's in the hospital. I didn't know what was going on and just the busyness of life. And then I got a text, I guess a week ago today, from Jacob Smith just being like, if you knew Everett Lees, he died last night. And I was just like, what? What? And I said on Sunday, I'm not the kind of person who's prone to ask like the why question, like why God, like why this guy, this faithful priest, this father, this, because you may not be aware of this, but the Episcopal Church is not exactly killing it right now. We're sort of starved for like good leaders and faithful gospel proclaimers, and he was like one of those guys. And you're like, really, God? Like, really? Like, you're going to take Everett? I mean, this is your will. This is your plan. And I kind of, I tied it into, this gospel this past Sunday was Jesus saying, who do you say that I am? And Peter's like, you're the Messiah. And Peter must have been like, yes, I got it right. And then Jesus says, yeah, and here's what's going to happen. We're going to Jerusalem. I'm going to suffer and be betrayed, and I'm going to die. And Peter's like, no way, that's the plan. That can't possibly be the plan. Mm. And it's one of those things where, yeah, I don't know. You just have to trust God, because it just doesn't. It's like, really? Okay. Yeah. Okay. I guess you're going to take Everett.
It is going to be one of those whys for me. There's always there's a couple people in our church, in our life, that I would just say, this is why. There's maybe one day I've got a shred of hope that there will be some sort of answer or some kind of serenity around that person. Everett had so much energy and creativity about kind of the right things. So getting to do that Tulsa conference and seeing the group of people that he brought around him, and just, it was such a wonderfully kind of like diverse and motley crew, the folks that were just, but included like his bishop, who was devoted to him too. And I was like, this feels like almost like a functional version of the church, where this little pocket in Tulsa where everyone seems to actually love each other and be supporting each other. And the main thing is the main thing. I was extraordinarily touched. He did an interview last year with another sort of a person in that orbit. Ben Crosby asked, what do worship and preaching typically look like at Christ Church? And he said this: I've changed in fairly significant ways since being introduced to Mockingbird a few years ago, in a focus on preaching grace. How that's something we don't hear anywhere else in society, and that the church's central role is to proclaim the gospel of grace and forgiveness. Said, I would say that really good Book of Common Prayer liturgy combined with grace-centered preaching, almost law gospel preaching, has been a huge benefit for us, where people are like, that really resonates. Mockingbird has been transformative for me. It was at a Mockingbird conference that I heard the gospel preached for the first time in a way that really changed me. I mean, I'm sort of getting emotional, but that was
wow.
He didn't have to do that, And
yeah.
he was.
He didn't have to do that.
It was. Yeah.
Everett, for me, was one of those rare guys who could actually come up and tell me something encouraging, because I find that when I meet a lot of men in person who maybe listen to this podcast, they always say something stupid. Like they'll comment on what I'm wearing or something, or they'll say, the worst thing they say, and they say this all the time, is, my wife's a big fan.
Yeah,
and I'll say,
guys. Come on, guys.
I'll just say, so you don't like me? Like, that's what I say back. But Everett was one of those rare guys, and an Episcopal priest, right? This rare combination, for me at least, that we could like encourage each other. And I had just sent him a note 2 days before he died that I was praying for him. And, I just keep thinking about his wife having to wake up every morning for these past few weeks and remember what's happened, and then guide her children through that remembrance every day. And I just think ardent prayer for them. And Dave, this is up to you, but there is a fund that people have created for the family, the diocese has created. And I it would be good for us to link to that, because she's in a real situation. So
yeah. The Everett Family Trust, or the Lees Family Trust, to provide for his kids. I will definitely put a link to that in the show notes. And we are praying for the Lees family, and we'll pray at the end specifically for them. But okay, I know Everett. I know that he wouldn't want us to be too somber, so let's go from the.
So his associate said he was cracking jokes in the hospital until the end. Trying to make everyone else feel comfortable with what was going on.
Let's go from then the sublime to the ridiculous. And I came across this, which I think feels very lightweight, but probably taps into something real. This is in the Atlantic Monthly, How School Drop-Off Became a Nightmare.
Oh.
School drop-off became a nightmare. This is by Kendra Hurley. Stop by an elementary school mid-morning and you're likely to find a sight of relative calm. Students in their classroom cutting away at construction paper. Kids taking turns at Foursquare on the blacktop. Come at drop-off, though, and you'll probably see a very different picture. The school perimeters thickening with jigsaw layers of sedans, minivans, and SUVs. One Florida resident told ABC News, "You're taking your life into your own hands to get out of here." As The Atlantic put it last year, the school car line has become a quote-unquote daily punishment for many parents. She goes on to say, today, more parents in the United States drive kids to school than ever, making up more than 10% of rush hour traffic. The result is mayhem. For families, the long waits are at best a stressful time suck. Some city planners take the car line as proof of our failure to create the kind of people-centered neighborhoods families thrive in. Climate scientists might consider it a nitrogen oxide-drenched environmental disaster. Scolds might rail at what they see as helicopter parents chaperoning their kids everywhere. But the car line is not just a chaotic place with potentially sobering implications. It's also a lonely one. In it, parents wait in metal boxes with their kids and honk at their neighbors instead of connecting with them. Toward the end of the article, she said, about a third of children still ride the school bus. But during the coronavirus pandemic especially, which spurred a nationwide shortage of drivers, bus services were slashed and ridership fell. As more schools and families give up on using school buses, routes combine, which means many of the kids left riding live farther apart from one another and their journeys take longer, and the bus becomes just as inconvenient as the car line. Now, I realize this is not remotely as weighty as what we opened with in relation to our dear friend Everett. And yet, I guarantee you, if I were to talk to Everett Lees right now, he would agree that school drop-off has become insane. Do you guys experience this in your own settings? Have you heard people complain? How do you survive the school line? Do you have what's going on?
So our kids are at this new school and they do have buses, but they only put them in truly neighborhoods that have the need. Mm-hmm. So we don't live in that neighborhood here in Green Hills, Nashville. So we have to drive our kids, and it's 45 minutes twice a day round trip. And I don't know that it's lonely. That's so interesting that they observe it that way. I think I sit there and practice for church choir on Wednesday nights. I really am like a mom from 1952. You're
lucky children.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they come in. I'm like, woo! Yeah. But I mean, it's part of reality. And I don't, there's kind of no way around it. It's so funny we're talking about this because this morning, and I don't read the articles in advance. This morning, I said to Josh, sometimes when I think about how much longer we have to get up early in the morning and take the children to school, I get very overwhelmed. Mm. And he's like, yeah. He's like, I try not to think about it because, it's years more. But I think mine maybe is a little easier because there's like this probably self-righteous, like white liberal guilt cause behind it, right? I'm like, we can take our kids to school. So I don't know. But that's probably how I that and like singing in Latin is how I navigate it. So.
Sarah, did you grow up taking the bus to school?
Hell yes. In Mississippi, absolutely. And my mom had my ass out there at 6:20 in the a.m. and Mr. Willie picked me up. And I was freezing and nobody cared. It'd be 45 degrees outside.
I remember my hair freezing. Like you feel
in
your
Connecticut,
hair.
I bet.
Yeah.
Yes.
Were those positive memories or traumatic ones, or do you look back on the bus with some kind of nostalgia or just grateful that you're sparing your kids that experience?
Gosh, I just remember when Heather Granger got her period and there was blood on the back of her white shorts. That's all I remember.
But that's the sort of stuff that happens on the bus.
That's all I remember.
That doesn't happen in carpool, though.
That does not happen in carpool, honey.
You got to apologize to that poor woman right now.
Sorry.
Hopefully she's not a listener.
Sorry, Heather.
RJ, what does this bring up for you, if anything?
No, yeah. So Marshall went back to school 2 weeks late this year because they were doing construction at his school, and part of it was they were completely redoing the drop-off area. So it's been a totally new system, which means, in the afternoon, so his school is done at 3:00, and like you either better get there at like 2:30 or don't even bother showing up until 3:30. It's like you got to be first in line or you're going to be waiting forever. And then they went and sent an email out the first week of school being like, you must pick up your child by 3:20. If you don't, there'll be a $200 fine.
What?
And I know, we were like, what? But still, so then I'm showing up at like 3, and then guess what? I still don't pick him up till 3:30 because we're not even through the line. I'm like, how are you going to find us? It's like there's no hope of. And then, of course, yesterday, finally, I show up at 3:15. They finally gotten their act together. I'm like barely picking him up at 3:20. I'm like, they better not find me, or we're going to have words. Yeah, my children, I have 3 kids. None of them have ever ridden a bus ever in their life to go to school. I will say when we lived in Houston, Sarah, like you'll appreciate this. You knew where we were in Maplewood.
Yeah.
We had one kid at Presbyterian, which was in the museum district, and one kid at St. John's, which was in River Oaks. And then I went to Memorial, where, so it was like an hour in the morning.
Yeah.
But I will also say when my kids started driving themselves, I really missed that time. I really like the mornings are usually like this right now, Marshall has some game he wants to play. Right now, the game he wants to play, he's like, Dad, let's play the movie game. And he's like, I'm thinking of a movie where there are wars in the stars, Star Wars, or, and he just like, I've had 1 cup of coffee. I'm barely awake.
Yeah,
He's like firing away at me. And part of me is going insane. And part of me is like, this is only going to last for a little while.
Yeah.
And you're going to look back on this 20 minutes in the morning fondly. Because when he's driving himself to school or when he's gone, it's going to be, or when he hits puberty and doesn't want to talk to you at all.
Yeah.
It's like, how's your day? Good. How are you doing? Fine.
Oh, yeah. We're
it's
in
like
that now.
He actually wants to interact with me. So, yeah, he's not yet an Amazon package that hates me. He's an Amazon package that will not shut the fuck up.
He's a loud Amazon package.
Ever. And he has no one to
goodness.
talk to because he has no brothers around. So it's utterly exhausting, but also lovely.
Yeah.
So those are my thoughts on
Wow,
drop-off.
I have so much to say here too because we've had the gamut of all of this stuff. Both right now, 2 of my boys do take buses to and from school every day, and it's wonderful. And they are on for a long time because there is a shortage of bus drivers, but they do have a ride. And it's my oldest gets time to do homework. My youngest
Totally
gets time
homework on the bus.
He does do homework on the bus. He also gets in trouble on the bus. Like I get calls from the bus driver.
Yes.
And like
Right
you don't
passage.
act around on a school bus.
Well, my younger child, my 8-year-old, has a bus driver who sees it as her vocation in a way that like she brings them snacks and she knows their names and she gives them presents and we give them it's just like it's someone who doesn't have to do that sees it as like this labor of love.
Wow.
Right.
We did have that in our old neighborhood where we were downtown, or quote unquote downtown. But when COVID came around and they were discontinued, what we ended up doing was walking to school most days. It was a longish walk, but it was up a couple of hills, but it was a great, great time. And that circumvented all of the insanity of the jigsaw puzzle that I now deal with whenever I do have to do a pickup for one of these schools. My middle child, he goes to a private school, so we have to do drop off every day. But that time we get on the way to and from school, like we've listened to like the Harry Potter series, like and he loves it.
That's great.
It's really fun. And sometimes like I'll go and park afterwards and keep listening because I need to know what happens next.
Yeah.
So I'd
like to listen to something if my son would shut up, but he never does.
I think the actual platonic ideal of how this works is riding bikes to school. And
totally.
We did that a couple times last year.
If you can be in a place if you've ever experienced what it's like to ride bikes to school, because you don't have to deal with the traffic jam. And then,
have you guys seen the bike bus thing that's like been in the news a lot lately? So they're doing it. Of course, they're doing it in the Pacific Northwest, but they're doing it somewhere in Europe, and it's literally
probably the Netherlands.
I swear it might be RJ,
and it's like more bikes than people in Holland.
It's organized by a couple of parents, and one of them usually has strapped a speaker to their bike, and they're playing like Welcome to the Jungle
Mhm.
I
And
love
as they
it.
ride past
Oh
kids'
my
houses,
gosh.
kids are out there on their bikes and
Yes.
they join the bike bus. And it's so much safer, right? Because you're so much safer than if it's just one kid on a bike or even an adult and a kid on a bike. And that's how they're getting to school. And it looks so fun and
Totally.
Yeah.
and so easy, for everybody involved. I would love if we had something like that.
But I also know there's such a thing as like there's one school in town where the pickoff and drop off line is known as like extremely stressful because it's everyone sizing each other up, and it's sort of the really affluent line, and it's kind of like a snake pit of like what's drama is going to occur here. And like to be honest with you, I've heard people's like, I don't want to, that's a good school, but I don't want to send my kid there because I cannot deal with the insane judgment of what I need to look like to be in that line in the morning. And that's another matter for parents here to deal with.
Can I just speak to that for a second? Because Annie's last sweet little elementary school that she went to here, I mean, y'all, when she got a school t-shirt, it was in the Seaside font, okay? Like, it might as well have been a private school. And it was very much a scene because when you did pick up in the afternoons, you parked your little car, and like they get 3 rows of cars in, so it's a lot of people. You park your little car, and then you get out and you stand up on the little ledge of your car and you wave so your baby can see you, and then everybody else can too. And I just consider it a ministry of witness to look like shit. Like, that's how you need to approach these situations. Like, you're the one that's going to show up. My 4 strands of hair greased to my head. I'm in clothes I've been wearing for 2 days. Like, be a ministry of presence for these people. Don't let
It's
it
the
scare you
bathrobe
off.
lady again. There
Yes,
she is.
yes. Lower the bar.
Your kids are like hiding in the back. Like we don't.
True
like,
story.
We swear our mom
True
is not
story.
here. We,
Yeah,
where is she? We'll
If
walk
I have
home.
on like normal clothes at all, they're like, "What did you have today? Like, are you going somewhere?" Yeah.
Well, next article is along these lines, actually. It's written by Darby Saxby in the New York Times under the title, Parents Should Ignore Their Children More Often. She says this.
I would if I could. Again, he doesn't shut up.
I recently spoke with an anthropologist named Barry Hewlett who studies child rearing in hunter-gatherer societies in Central Africa. He explained to me that children in those societies spend lots of time with their parents. They tag along throughout the day and often help with tasks like foraging, but they're rarely the main object of their parents' attention. Sometimes bored, sometimes engaged, these kids spend much of their time observing adults doing adult things. Parents in contemporary industrialized societies have often taken the opposite approach. In the precious time when we're not working, we place our children at the center of our attention, consciously engaging and entertaining them. We drive them around to sports practice and music lessons where they are observed and monitored by adults rather than the other way around. We feel guilty when we have to drag our children along with us to take care of boring adult business. I found myself thinking about those hunter-gatherers last month when I read the advisory from the Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, warning that many parents in America are stressed to their breaking point. This is a public health advisory. There are plenty of reasons for this worrisome state of affairs. One is that we don't ignore our children often enough. A parenting style that took its cue from those hunter-gatherers would insist that one of the best things parents can do for ourselves as well as our children is to go about our own lives and tote our children along. You might call it mindful underparenting. I love that line. Following adults around gives children the tremendous gift of learning to tolerate boredom, which fosters patience, resourcefulness, and creativity. But I think about this a lot in terms of just birth order dynamics. You know, you almost always have, if you've got a large family, you have the oldest child who is the most neurotic and the youngest child who is sort of benignly neglected and seems to be the most well-adjusted. It's a pattern that I've just seen over and over and over again. Just witness R.J. Heyman and versus Daniel Heyman, his youngest brother.
Yes.
But it's my father-in-law, for example, both of his older siblings were very intentionally parented, and he said they sort of just ignored me, and he turned out the most sort of adjusted in certain ways, at least. And I was talking to another friend who said, the debates about how to parent, what to do here, gentle parenting this, tiger parenting that. He's like, I wonder if sometimes the real answer is just to do less parenting. I think there's something to that. I also have found, especially around things like travel, sports, and when it comes to like church attendance and stuff like that, the swing from children being seen and not heard to children completely dictating one's schedule as a parent, it's been pretty, violent, that swing. It's gone really far to the other end. And when I see parents, when I hear this stuff about parents being stressed to clinical levels because they're trying to be everything at all times to all their kids, I got to say, I don't think it's sustainable, and I do see the cost to it. I don't personally know how to unburden myself from that, or how to like where the draw of certain lines. But anyway, what do you guys think about this? Benign neglect, mindful underparenting. Sarah Condon.
I have a cousin's wife I'm very close with named Brooke. Dave, I have accidentally texted you with Brooke. Brooke is one of the only churchgoers in the family, and I think she listens to the podcast pretty regularly.
Hey, Brooke.
She was really excited that she accidentally got included with her husband's name's David. So, but I remember, we have so many babies in that family, and I was at a family gathering in the past 2 years, and Brooke had one of their daughters, and I must have been the oldest, and she was probably 3, and she kept asking for chocolate. And Brooke kind of looked at me and said, and of course there was a room full of people all observing her getting chocolate. So Brooke was like, I probably shouldn't give this to her, right? And I said, Brooke, sometimes they just come out bad, and there's not anything you can do about it. I mean, I just think we have so much control in their lives, and we keep obsessing over them. And I know, at least in my own parenting, that obsession can quickly turn to resentment.
Yep.
And having some space to say, this is not all about me, and this is not the only thing happening in the context of our family, is really important. We've started doing a thing when we can on Friday nights. We always order pizza like any other red-blooded American family, but we will order it from a place that has a bar. And Josh and I will leave the kids, go to the bar, grab a drink, and sit together and talk for 25 minutes. Just like, oh my God, we made it through the week. Like, reconnect, and then get the pizza and go home to them. And it's amazing how much calmer we are, and how we can kind of be present to them in their anxiety of hitting Friday, because we've said, okay, this is going to be okay, But I totally identify with that feeling of just like, especially if you have a kid that's particularly needy, and demanding. I don't mean they all come out bad. That was a joke.
There's only so much control you have.
There's only so much control.
It's just hypervigilance and like obsession with one's children at all times. That swing of the pendulum, it's a different form of control. For example, like maybe before you were everything was about controlling your own schedule, and now it's about, if I control all of these, maximize my child's days and optimize them, then they will somehow be okay, in their future will be fine, and they will be all right as well. And it's the sort of, it ends up controlling us, but RJ, I could go on and I will, but RJ, what else do you think?
Well, I've never been a hunter-gatherer, but I kind of wish I sometimes wish I was, right? Like the idea that you would live in a little community where everyone has like their own sleeping space, but then all the kids are waking up in the morning together. They're probably running out. You're doing everything together. Just sounds amazing. And I think, I guess when we first moved to Houston for like 2 years, we lived in a neighborhood where like kids would come over and knock on the door and they would go outside and play. But we've never really lived in a neighborhood like that for whatever reason. We've always lived some distance away from like friends. We had to drive them there, or maybe when they get a little bit older, they could bike over or something like that. And at least where we are right now, like we have a kid, like don't get me wrong, I love Marshall to death. And he's actually, his school year's off to a really good start. We're really thankful for that. He turned 8 just like 2 days ago. He's such a sweetheart. He is also, as we had him in a little therapy last year to deal with some stuff, his therapist said he might be the most extroverted kid like that she's ever met. Like all he ever wants to do is be around other people doing high energy stuff, having adventure all the time. And My wife and I, who are both pushing 50, like we cannot keep up. We can't keep up. And so we do have him in a lot of afternoon activities
Yes.
because like it's best for him. It's best for us. Like maybe there's a chance he'll come home and like maybe be tired and go to sleep, So we're just like, we're holding on, and we've never really had an only child, which which is what he is, right? Our two oldest kids are gone.
Functionally, yeah.
So I get the ignoring your kids. I do also think that there's something to the way that we live as Americans, which tends to be kind of isolated and lonely. And we say it takes a village to raise a child, but no one really lives in a village. Maybe some people do. I think Dave, like where you used to live, maybe the kids, maybe where you are now too, the kids would just go and you wouldn't see them for a few hours, and like that was amazing. We just don't live in a neighborhood like that. I wish we did. And actually, we're like, maybe we should sell our house and move to a place like that. We don't know. But we're just, I think a lot of parenting is like a lot of life. It's kind of, you're trying to survive. And I'm not worried about him turning out okay. I think he's going to be fine. I'm just worried about keeping up with him. I can't keep up. Yeah.
Yeah, you're trying to, what are you saying? We're all doing the best we can with the resources we have and
yes.
like as much as we know at the time, and we don't know what we don't know kind of thing. I really have come to believe that Jonathan Haidt's right about the stuff that he says, that we're too protective in the real world and too laissez-faire in the online one,
digital world,
the digital world. And I think that's that's the problem. We need to. Safety has become such a paramount concern in a kind of the real world, but somehow not the online one, and that's like it's flip-flopped. You need to give kids plenty of opportunities for free play and all that stuff. I buy into that, and I see it. The hard part is when you feel structurally that it's become almost impossible because of the way that we also love to have our big little compounds, and everyone wants their acreage, and it's everyone's in the car all the time.
For loneliness.
It feels cursed to me.
Yeah. I mean, so we don't live in one of those neighborhoods either. And I do have moments. RJ, I have had that same thought where I'm like, we should just move. Like, I mean, I really love our house. And that would be
literally
crazy.
Broke her toe playing soccer with Marshall. And she's like, I can't do this for 2 hours every night. We got to put him in travel soccer. Or I'm going to go insane.
Right. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But I do think the one space we have this is church because... I mean, I've never seen anything like it. It's just the kids just go. You know what I mean? And so I stand around and talk to friends. There's a huge field. I mean, Annie's got some little girlfriend she hangs out with, and they're like up in the music loft, probably touching things they shouldn't. There's a 3-year-old who seems to always get lost, like the same one. We're all like, where is he? Like every Sunday. It's really beautiful. And I do feel like that's like one of the few spaces. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, one of Neil's friends, I really hope his mom does not listen to this podcast. One of Neil's friends got dropped off at church by his parents with the expectation he would go to church. And Neil was like, hey, he got dropped off at church, but we don't really want to go to church. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go to church and you guys can do whatever the hell you do in the parish hall. And so like they played basketball in the gym. They probably made coffee with like 4 tablespoons of sugar in it, and chugged it. Like they made do with whatever is like in a church parish hall for an hour, and they had a blast. And there's very little of that left in the world. So I try to let them have it as much as I can when we're in those spaces.
This is one of the reasons why I think anyone who's never had spent time at a church that has a graveyard is missing out, because when you're a kid and you get lost and have fun, go, monkey around in a graveyard with your friends, there's nothing quite like it.
Yeah.
And my older brother has a church with a huge graveyard on their grounds, and one of the most fun things to do when we visit is just like the kids just go wild in the graveyard. Anyway, as part and parcel of this over-parenting thing, there's just an aside here, but someone sent me an article from Ars Technica. Do you guys know who Larry Ellison is? He's the founder of Oracle. He was briefly like the second richest man in the world. there is a
Now
big
he's like top. He's like 10th.
Poor
He's doing
Larry.
okay. He's doing okay.
He's 80 years old, but this past week, they reported, he says, he assured investors that omnipresent AI cameras will ensure good behavior in society. This is last week. On Thursday, Oracle co-founder Larry Ellison shared his vision for an AI-powered surveillance future during a company financial meeting. During investor Q&A, Ellison described a world where artificial intelligence systems would constantly monitor citizens through an extensive network of cameras and drones, stating this would ensure both police and citizens don't break the law. Ellison said, quote, "Citizens will be on their best behavior because we're constantly recording and reporting everything that's going on. We're going to have supervision," he continued. "Every police officer is going to be supervised at all time, and if there's a problem, AI will report the problem and report it to the appropriate person. There will be no mindful underparenting." Thank you very much. And the writer of the article, Benj Edwards, wrote, "Ellison's vision bears more than a passing resemblance to the cautionary world portrayed in George Orwell's prescient novel 1984. And this idea that more supervision, constant surveillance is that will produce good behavior and obedience, it just runs totally counter to the way human beings actually work. The fact that this guy would have, in my opinion, I'm sure there's wonderful things about him as a human. However, this outlook is so wrong-headed about the way human beings work that it frightens me to death that he would have outsized influence on decisions being made. That you think the real problem in the world is that we just need even more surveillance of folks to ensure compliance. I don't know, you guys.
Isn't this? Didn't we read an article a few years ago how this is happening in China? Like this is exactly what's happening.
This sounds very what's happening in China.
The social credit score or whatever, and people, just completely ruining people's lives and driving them underground and driving depression, driving bad behavior. Actually, creates more bad behavior.
It creates more. It does.
The law increases the trespass. Someone once said. So it's happening. And it seems not to be working. Yeah.
Well, it also touches on something else that the best thing I read this week, and which I was bringing to you guys today, which was sort of a next, second to last big thing we're going to talk about, is Ezra Klein in the New York Times interviewed Zadie Smith, the writer of fiction and essays and novels, who, for my money, is one of the most interesting people on the planet. She, I've been dying to get her to speak at a New York conference, but because she lives in New York, even though she's British, but that just doesn't seem to be in the cards because of her agent. Anyway.
Call us, Zadie. Call us.
We're calling everybody out today.
Please.
Call us, Zadie.
There's no one, every time she opens her mouth, she says something interesting. And she was interviewed here by Ezra Klein, and she touches on all of the dynamics we've just discussed, and the way especially that kind of like that technology seems to be not producing what we're hoping it will produce, but in an interesting way. She's asked what she makes of the sentence, "The facts don't care about my feelings." She says this to Ezra Klein: "The facts don't care about my feelings" is a truly fascistic sentence, to be honest. We are creatures of feeling, in part. So to deny that is to deny a part of the kind of animal we are in the world. And I think you see plenty of that in Palo Alto and many other places, Silicon Valley. But to take it as a principle is extraordinary to me. Even in the hardest sciences, emotion plays some role, instinct plays some role. And it also dismisses huge areas of people's human experience. The entirety of religious experience, almost the entirety of emotive experience of the natural world, philosophical experience. So for me, that obsession with rational argument is, well, it's just so distant from the way I think about humans and what they need. I would say that most of our experiences of ourselves are quite deeply irrational. If you stop a couple in the street and say to them, "Why are you married?" you are not going to get a rational answer from them. You're going to get some murmurings, some sentimental, some partially logical, some apologetic, some unsure. But there's a large area of our intimate lives, some of our most serious decisions, which can't be presented to logic in that way. I think you have to allow people an area of self that doesn't submit to a mathematical program. He sort of prompts her and says, "Well, okay, then what do we make of social media?" And she confesses to having a dumb phone, that she hasn't had a smartphone since 2008. She says this. She says, "All mediums modify you. Books modify you, TV modifies you, radio modifies you. The social life of a 16th century village modifies you. But the question becomes, what do you want to be modified by and to what degree? That's my only question. And when I look at the people who have designed these things, smartphones, etc., what they want, what their aims are, what they think a human being is or should be, the humans I know and love, this machinery is not worthy of them. That's the best I can put it. And I speak as someone who grew up as an entirely TV-addicted human. I love TV. I love reading. Modification is my bread and butter. And when the internet came, I was like, hallelujah, finally, we've got a medium which isn't made by the man or centralized. We're just going to be talking to each other, hanging out with each other, peer to peer. It's going to be amazing. That is not the internet we have. That is not what occurred. Technologies aren't neutral. They are a philosophy and an ideology. The technology of these algorithms is the idea that everything in the world can get classified. And that's not just a practical matter. That's a philosophy, that there's nothing in the world that cannot be organized, classified, and labeled. And I just don't believe that. We're going to keep hearing from Zadie, but before I do, what do you guys think of what she's saying? For me, it's like low anthropology 101. What about you?
So we are doing this series at St. B's right now. I'm showing up at it, about basically civility in the current political climate. And we had the chair for political science at Vanderbilt did a whole lecture for us this past Sunday. And it was so interesting about what are the assumptions we make about the other parties. Like, he asked people not to say it out loud, but like, how many Black people, like, what is the percentage of Black people in the Democratic Party? Like, what is the percentage of millionaires in the Republican Party? And showed us the numbers and talked about the reality of this. And then talked about how even when people know this, like, even when they're actually given this data, they still don't believe it. Like, they still trust their feelings. Right. And talked about like, how do we bridge this gap? Like how and that it really is about like relationship. And I kind of heard it and thought to myself, because there was sort of this encouragement at the end, like, hey, are there people in your lives that you can like remember that these are people and like be in a relationship with them, even if they don't politically go the same way you do. And I was like, I kind of self-righteously patted myself on the back, like, oh, I have a lot of, family members who don't vote like I do. And I'm like, really great to them. Okay. So I don't need this. And then that day I was at Whole Foods of all places. And I saw the woman next to me in the parking lot had a sticker for Kennedy. And I was like, oh, this is so interesting. And so I went over to her and I said, what are you going to do now? Because he's out of the race. And she got really emotional and was like, I don't know. And it was like, she sort of paused and said, are you feeling the same way? And I said, I kind of handled it in the way we learn to handle it when we're clergy, like just trying to listen more than say, And, she said a lot of stuff I don't agree with, but I was able to like hold space. And I don't use that phrase very often because it's overused in liberal Christianity, but I was able to hold space for her to just fall apart in the parking lot with me. And for me to say things like, that sounds really hard. I'm so sorry the system feels that way. Like, that sounds awful, And at the end of it, I invited her to our church. And
look at you.
Wow.
Well, but it's
evangelism.
But it's because it's literally because I went to this class and I was like, I love to think that I'm so self-actualized and I am just as guilty of this. Like, my feelings are facts and these people are imbeciles and they should be cast off, into the outer darkness. Thank you so much. Yeah. So
that's a beautiful moment though. Gosh.
It was crazy. I came home and I was like, babe, I think Sunday school worked.
You know what's interesting? She has a Zadie here. Mm-hmm. She's talking by way of hope about later on in the thing. And Ezra Klein quotes a passage to her from her book, The Fraud, which came out, her most recent novel. And this is the quote: says, "When she was young, she had wanted to know everyone, touch everyone, be everyone, go everywhere. Now, she thought, if you truly loved or were truly loved by two people in your lifetime, you had every right to think yourself a Midas." And he asks Zadie where that came from. She says, "I do often feel, even when I'm in great company, how unbelievably difficult it is to know another human being. It's just so hard. There's a line in The Fraud, 'Tell me everything.' And that to me is the key, being able to sit in front of another human being and just listen. Not projecting, not trying to make them agree with you, not trying to make them say what you want them to say, just listening to
Totally.
them. And that is so hard." And
And
in a way,
exhausting.
that's
Yeah.
what you did. And I think that there's love issued forth. RJ, what do you think of what Sarah said, but also what Zadie's saying here?
It's unassailably true. I mean, David Brooks wrote something in the New York Times like maybe last week or something about how, we like to think of ourselves as rational, mind-driven, creatures, and we're just not at all. We're just totally emotional creatures, and people believe what they want to believe.
Mm-hmm.
And you're never going to argue them out of what they want to believe by any kind of rational means.
Right.
It's just not going to happen. And I think that's,
And you believe what you want to believe. Yeah.
and that's right.
Totally.
I believe what I want to believe, which is why I think, when it comes to like preaching the gospel, part of it is like, let me tell you why believing in Jesus doesn't mean you have to check your brain at the door, but more, let me tell you why you would want to, why you might want to believe this. Let me show you what an amazing message this is, what an amazing person this is, like why this is so beautiful that you'd want to believe it. And then later we can talk about whether it's rational or not, once you've come to faith in him. But yeah, I've given up on trying to change anybody's mind, and I know Sarah. I also know what you mean about holding space for people, even though, and people in my context don't use that word that much, but I know exactly what you mean. Just allowing a person to be who they are and not casting judgment and listening and absorbing and just kind of being, and how powerful that can be. And it's also totally exhausting. At the same time, and to feel like that's your, and I'm sure Josh talks about this too, when you feel like that's your job to just absorb it all the time. And it's like, okay, and to quiet the emotions inside yourself that are being arisen by another person and say, okay, this is not about me. Let's just let them do their thing.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing that strikes me about, I would say Mockingbird, I would say the kind of theology that we really practice, is that we all hear these things and we sort of hear them as, well, people believe their feelings over facts, or people can't have their minds changed, or people, will fight to the death for who they're going to vote for president or whatever. And I think the gap that we cross is remembering that that's about us too.
Yeah, it's me. Yeah.
I aggressively will not listen to this person who's justifying this candidate. I will fight to the death for my candidate. I, think America's over if my candidate doesn't win. I am all of those things too. And you can laugh at yourself a little bit.
Yeah, I think what she's trying to really push against, what she hates about the devices, is that they flatten people into single categories.
Yeah.
And they don't account for.
Yeah.
And in a political season, an election season like this, it's extremely tempting to say that who you vote for is the one most true thing about you. And as though anyone in their private moments isn't filled with secret ambivalence and doubts.
Dave, you have to say all of this at Mockingbird Tyler.
She says it in there better than I could, but beautiful. I think it's it's so distant, the idea. And this is why when people get mad about quote unquote identity politics, that's what she's saying. She says it's a way of dismissing people by categorization, or yourself, or boxing yourself in. When human beings, the way we actually work and the way we actually function, we are never just one thing and not another too. That and the second we think we're pinned down, we've dismissed another person. So she's sort of like, I just don't think we have the right to dismiss other people as much as we would like to. And that's one of the reasons why she thinks she gets later on in the essay, she talks about the most interesting dynamics, most sort of damaged discourse in our culture is not actually between left and right or between black and white, but between old and young, because it's the only one in which all young people will become old. All white people will not become black. It's like you're actually opposing yourself in a way that she finds as fascinating, but like also very deeply uncomfortable. But her interest is not to say politics don't matter or identity doesn't matter, but just that they're not the most true thing going on. So for her, a lot of like the way that algorithms categorize and sort and organize and basically dehumanize people, it's very, very dangerous because it's all done also in public, and it disallows a person the space to be their full self, which is usually full of contradiction and confusion. And this is what she says in here as by means of hope. She says this: nobody ever has a good word to say about marriage, and I get it. But one thing marriage has offered me, at least, is this place of intimacy. Sometimes when you're out in the world, you can feel a lot like life is a performance. Even friendships that seem intimate sometimes have this performative aspect. When I retreat to the privacy of my marriage, that all goes away. I am myself. I am absolutely myself. I am free. And I think that's another way sometimes the discourse is a bit banal. It's got this kind of liberalized idea of freedom. So freedom is only getting to do whatever you want. But there's no conception that sometimes there might be things that provide a different form of freedom that is actually quite valuable. And for me, privacy. Anywhere you can go where you're not on stage, where you're not having to keep up some kind of idea of yourself, where you can just be, that is freedom. And any form that gives you that is really valuable to me. Now, to me, I think church, when it's at its best, can provide a place where people can just be rather than only a version. Maybe that's naive, but I think in theory, that's what we're talking about. A good marriage, a good romantic relationship does this too. That place where the performative aspects that the algorithms all latch onto and exploit are sort of washed away, and you can be yourself and your sort of your messiness, your sort of low anthropology, and experience being truly known and therefore truly loved. I mean, I don't think it's a mistake that she's talking about in terms of marriage, because love is often present there too. RJ is about to say something though, so why don't you tell
two things. One, the thing she said about how even friendships can be performative sometimes, like, it's true, but it just makes me so sad. It makes me sad. Like,
churches can be performative too, like that.
Everywhere can be. I mean, marriages can be performative. Everything can be performative, but I think don't we all just need spaces and relationships that are not performative, where we can actually just bring ourselves and be ourselves. And I'm grateful that I do have a marriage like that. Like, I do feel like Jamie and I are ourselves around each other. I'm grateful for that. And I have some friends like that too. The one thing you said it a while ago that I have a little bit of an allergic reaction to, and I'm trying to think it through, is about sort of choosing the things that we're shaped by.
Oh, RJ, speak to this. Yeah, I wrote that down.
I don't.
What's going to modify
I just
you?
wrote, that's a lot of discipline. Like,
it is, and it just feels Aristotelian.
Yeah,
right? Like just if you want to be a certain kind of person, and then make the kinds of choices that person would make, and eventually you'll get there. No, not true. And it's also so counter to what Jesus says. Like, it's not what goes into a man that makes him unclean. It's what comes out of a man, right? And all that social media is doing is it's revealing what's in our hearts. Now, it is also true, though, like with my 8-year-old, he's very different when he watches terrible YouTube videos than when he watches Gumball. Like, we've noticed, like it just, so there is some kernel of truth to it. But I also think in my own life, it
only goes so far.
I tend to have a more cathartic death and resurrection experience of change. That usually I won't change until I have no other choice, and then I'm on my knees and I'm in a heap, and then God shows up and does something and brings some healing and some peace, and then there's a change. I'd like to believe, and I'm sure there are people like this that make choices that are healthier, that actually start exercising or drinking less or get off Facebook and suddenly become better, more fulfilled people. I still just don't know if that's true, or I'm not convinced about that as a recipe for change.
Have we ever thought that maybe it's just us though? Like the three of us?
Meaning that we're the only
No,
we're the
only ones that can't get it.
through catharsis and death and resurrection.
She
that we're the
fesses
only,
up to a little bit of that Aristotelian sort of William James
Yeah.
kind of thing,
Yeah.
like that you can
Yeah.
submit to yourself.
I just need a really good life coach. If I could just get a
Right.
really good life coach. I will
Right.
say there is this one guy here, Ryan, who's a great guy. We're becoming friends. And he's not, he doesn't hide this, but like, he stopped drinking a few years ago. Not because he was an alcoholic, but he just stopped drinking. And he
Right.
gardens, and he's like coaching football, and he's a good father, and he exercises, and and I'm just like, who the hell are you? Like, how do you do these things?
Yeah.
I'm like, you are my poster child for like what positive life choices sort of looks like.
Right.
And I want to be more like Ryan, but I don't
Yeah.
feel myself getting there.
I mean-
soapbox, you know what I'm talking about?
I do. I mean, I think there are things that are helpful and healthy for us, and things that are less healthy, and like that they can steer things and influence us to some extent. They're not going to be salvific. They're not going to be the ultimate. They're not going to reach us at the deepest level. There's no way to. So I don't want to have some sort of despairing kind of outlook that says there's nothing that I can change about my life that won't make me feel a little bit better. You get
Yeah.
on some medication,
Yeah.
go to church, go to some therapy.
Yeah.
Ozempic's been really useful for some people in my life. Yeah.
Put away your phone
sure.
before at 8 p.m. or something like that. I mean,
Yeah.
the more and more I see people that are just like that are sort of basically off smartphones seem to be a whole lot doing better. Just they're not as filled with anxiety and fear. I talked to a guy the other day. I was trying to talk about how I wanted to summon. I was working on summoning compassion during this election period for all Americans, just like you. And I talked about the Henry Wadsworth Longfellow quote about, if you were to read the secret history of any of your enemies, you would find sorrow and suffering enough that all hostility would be disarmed.
Yeah.
And I really believe that's true. And at the same time, a guy afterwards said, "That's true, Dave. But I stopped looking at the news 15 years ago, and I've been a whole lot happier." And I was like,
Yes.
yeah, I get it. There are some things you can do, but ultimately the deepest level is the sort of, I won't stop until is the recovery, the more desperation model. Where I'm at, I think that's actually the truth about human nature, and I think Zadie's very close to it. But she does hold room. She holds room. Gosh, that phrase. You're right. But for Aristotle in a way that we might not.
Making better choices and being a little bit happier. I guess what I want to say is what I believe
He's
in my
back.
heart of
He's
hearts. I'm
back.
sorry, is that true peace and true happiness means knowing that you are loved and it's going to be okay regardless of the choices that you make.
Yeah.
Something like that, because we are all making disastrous choices all the time.
All the time.
And nothing is going to stop
All the
that,
time. Right.
Yes.
But that we are loved. It's going to be okay. Jesus has died. He has risen again. This is not the end of the story. Like, I cannot wait for heaven. Oh my God. I'm so over it. There was an article something like 41% of Americans say that they're at peak stress right now.
Yeah.
Something like that. And it's back to school season. It's election season. It's, it's inflation. It's whatever. Like, I don't know what it is.
Ooh.
But
Yes.
man, I just can't wait for things to get a little easier someday. I just hope it's before I die.
Well, let's
LEXAPRO. Lex Pro.
No, I need catharsis.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Well, I thought we'd give the final word to Lindsay Hollifield, someone we spoke about last season. She's this wonderful writer who's kind of fallen into our lap. And she writes about it in a very non-Aristotelian way, and very much in the kind of the allowing for less agency, or sort of what happens when you cannot seem to submit yourself to the right modification system, or the right, what if you know you should and you can't, and the sort of more addiction 12-step model of change and recovery and hope. And she wrote for us last week called When All Else Fails. This is what she says. She says, "It was the middle of October 2016, and a graying psychiatrist with a perfectly trimmed goatee sat across from me in his office in a treatment facility for anorexia. He was attempting to get me to speak to him about my self-destructive behaviors, and I was having none of it. I could hear his words telling me that I was sick, but to my mind, I was neither sick nor completely powerless over my behaviors. I'm perfectly comfortable with silence, he said through a tight smile. I've actually sat through entire sessions in silence. So have I, Lindsay responded dryly, and she proceeded to do just that. In our next session, the psychiatrist came armed with a different approach, saying, if you're not ready to recover, perhaps it's because you need to hit rock bottom first. While I'm sure he meant well, I have never found the idea of rock bottom to be a helpful phrase in my life. Even in my worst moments with anorexia, I proved exceptionally skilled at believing I was still in control. I held tightly to an illusion of power and agency even when I lay hooked up to machines in a hospital room. To this day, there is a part of me that resists the idea of powerlessness. It may not be regarding the eating disorder anymore, but seeing my spiritual state as one of bondage to sin is something that I fight. I am slowly learning what so many faithful Christians before me have known, that admitting powerlessness to sin sickness leads to a desperation about my efforts and a turning of my gaze externally for rescue. Jesus gives me himself in that place, offering the truth of my state and the freeing answer to that state. I know from experience now that reaching out for the mere garments of Jesus comes only when there is no other place to look. That kind of desperation comes when you finally and blessedly realize that the sickness within you is deeper than you can heal on your own. I don't know when I first spoke the words, I think I need help, and actually meant them. But I do know that each Sunday I hear the pastor pray, show us our need for Jesus, and then give him to us. In this prayer is the continued pattern of my life and yours on this side of eternity, asking God for the gift of clear vision of our sin-sick state, despairing of our ability to fix it, and then meeting the grace of Jesus afresh as he gives himself to us. Now that I've found to be of deep comfort and consolation, but also truth, that is when she says she doesn't like the rock bottom experience, what she's really saying, she resists it. She resists the realization that comes, and that finally, it really only comes when there's nowhere else to turn. That asking for help is when there are no other options. What was my brother John says, God's office is at the end of your rope, and that's not just a pithy saying. It proves true. At least it proved true for Lindsay, who met Jesus not as her helper or her coach, but as her savior in the moments of despair. And she talks in that wonderful piece about the woman who was affecting with the sort of bleeding for 12 years and the way that physicians had actually made it worse until she finally decided to risk herself on a savior, or had to or die. And it's a beautiful, beautiful picture that I think is the same thing that, well, I want to hear from you guys about Lindsay, because I think it relates to everything that Everett responded to and what we have to say.
This past week, I saw a meme that said, I just found out that rock bottom has a basement, which I really liked.
That's incredible.
You know, anorexia is classified not as its own diagnosis in medicine now, but is classified as sort of like a part of being OCD. So it is ultimately about control. And I think, well, I would just say, I mean, that's something I struggled with when I was younger and had to go into some therapy for. I think a lot of women have to struggle with it, and I feel like we don't talk about it at all, especially once you hit sort of childbearing age, you have kids, and you're like, oh, I was just silly. And, you know, in some women, I think can kind of come out without having to be hospitalized, and then some women have to go through what she went through. And I'm so grateful that she's willing to share this out loud with people, because I think it's really necessary. I mean, on a totally non-theological note, I remember reading years ago that some global health organization declared eating disorders as one of the primary sort of violence against women because it's so real. I just have to say, it seems like it would be one of the hardest things to be in and to think about, like, you don't have any control, because it is just so primarily about control. Because I do think we throw that phrase around, right, a lot, like rock bottom and all that kind of stuff. Like you'll know, right, when it's really bad, and it's like, well, if you think you're in control of it, then you have no idea when it's really bad. I mean, it's not unlike us talking about parenting. It's like, if you think the ultimate goal is controlling the situation, whatever that situation is, parenting, keeping your scale at a certain number, whatever, you will have no clue when it's gone really badly, because you haven't given yourself a break from thinking about it. You know, you haven't gotten a beer full calorie at the pizza place with your husband, you know, before you go back to your kids who have all these issues. So I just think this is so beautiful, and I'm so grateful that she's willing to share it with us.
I agree 100%. I think that the part of the sin sickness that she talks about is this, not just predilection, but addiction to control. And control is the answer. We think control, or we're obsessed with control as the answer to the problems which control creates. And then all of a sudden, your problems aren't your problems. It's your solutions are your problems, you know,
Yes.
which is this nonstop ever. If I just up the volume on my control, and this is one way.
Make better choices.
It affects women. I see.
Get off social media.
Yeah, exactly, though. I think that it affects men in very similar, in different ways, but also quite similar ways.
Sure.
It's control. It's often seems to be what God needs to heal us from and save us from is our grasping for control in all things, in control that we don't actually have. That's the problem. It's not that control itself is bad, it's that you don't actually have control. And that's something that's easier said than done, but it's where faith really does begin on a moment-to-moment level.
I mean, I think we should just also be honest that, like, cracking jokes on your deathbed is probably the most real way of saying you don't have any control.
Yes. I mean, Everett Lees had no control. He had a prayer life, and he had a savior who he believed had things in control. But what an assault on all of your plans.
Yeah.
That was. RJ, what do you want to say before we end?
A couple things. One, there's been a number of young ladies that have come through our church in the last kind of year and a half. And when they first started coming, they just kind of said they were down here for school or work or whatever. And then it came out that they were down here as part of an inpatient treatment program for eating disorders and sort of associated complications and things like that. And they've pretty much all now, they've come out of their programs, they've moved back home, but just all written really beautiful letters to us, you know, about what the church meant to them and being seen, being loved, being held, being healed.
I remember seeing those girls when I was there.
Yeah. And I'm just, this makes me really grateful, you know, that the church can actually be a place where people actually do find real healing, you know, through the power of the Holy Spirit and the power of kind of loving community and people, and, you know, and people that are willing to just love. So I'm grateful for that. And I'm also, you know, so last week on top of like Everett dying, you know, one of my coworkers turns out was in the hospital for a few days. Turns out he probably had a heart attack. He's back now. And then, you know, like people are getting sick and people are in the hospital and there's just all this stuff going on. And the one reaction is like, come on, God, we got so much to get done here. We got so much we got to do. Like, how are we supposed to get the work done that you've called us to do whenever nothing is going right ever? You know, come on. And then the other side is like, there's freedom in just saying, you know, life is a crazy thing. And we never, you know, we're all just, as this is my sermon on Sunday, we're all just one diagnosis or one accident away from, you know, meeting our end. And there's a reason that Jesus says each day has enough trouble of its own, and live one day at a time and trust me. And my ways are not your ways. Neither are your thoughts my thoughts, says the Lord. I don't operate the way that you do. And your only choice, the only way to find anything like peace and freedom is just to trust me one day at a time and to walk forward. And we all got to make choices. We all got things we got to do. but to trust that he's with us and loves us and working through it, even when we don't know what the hell we're doing or what the hell is going on and can't control anything. So definitely,
RJ, I love that. I mean, the next time I'm thinking, oh my God, we have 10 years of school ahead of us, I'm going to think, one day's trouble is enough.
Yeah.
Well, and this is what you learned through the death of your parents, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's very clarifying about what matters and what doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I think Everett's death made me step back and be like, wait, what am I doing here? Like, what the hell what the hell is my life actually about?
Right.
What do I actually, if I know that I'm just 15 days away from meeting Jesus, like, what does that mean for how I treat other people, how I live my life, how I treat myself?
Yeah.
How I hold my life. Yeah. Got to hold it loosely.
Well,
I hate that.
Hold on loosely.
Yeah.
Let's close with the words that were said at Everett's funeral that Kara reproduced when she was talking about him. These are from the Book of Common Prayer, ultimately taken from the Bible as well. And this is where the hope really resides, not in a better management scheme or better planning. I am the resurrection and I am the life, says the Lord. Whoever has faith in me shall have life, even though he die. And everyone who has life and has committed himself to me in faith shall not die forever. As for me, I know that my Redeemer lives, and that at the last he will stand upon the earth. After my awaking, he will raise me up, and in my body I shall see God. I myself shall see, and my eyes behold him who is my friend and not a stranger. On that note, thanks for talking today, guys. We'll talk to you in a few weeks.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by TJ Hester. And if you like what you've heard, please drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating or review. Until next time.